taking a deep dive into some of the most famous examples of prisoners who endured the harshest punishments in history. From renowned writers who transformed their suffering into literary masterpieces to political dissidents who became symbols of resistance, these individuals faced unimaginable adversity. Their stories, marked by courage, resilience, and unyielding conviction, continue to inspire and remind us of the enduring struggle for freedom and justice across the ages. Join us as we explore the lives of those who, despite facing brutal imprisonment, left an indelible mark on history. Number 1. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, a towering figure in the fight against apartheid in South Africa, was imprisoned for 27 years. Mandela was arrested in 1962 and initially sentenced to 5 years in prison for inciting workers' strikes and leaving the country illegally. However, during the Rivonia trial in 1964, he and several others were sentenced to life imprisonment for sabotage and other charges related to their struggle against apartheid. Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years in prison on Robben Island, where he was confined to a small cell without a bed or plumbing, forced to sleep on the floor. The prison was notorious for its brutal conditions, including forced labor in a lime quarry, where Mandela and other political prisoners worked under the scorching sun, enduring physical and mental hardships. Communication with the outside world was severely restricted, and he was allowed only one visitor a year for 30 minutes. Despite these conditions, Mandela remained a symbol of resistance. He continued to inspire his fellow inmates and the broader anti-apartheid movement, using his time in prison to reflect and strategize about the future of South Africa. His imprisonment drew international attention, making him a global symbol of the struggle for human rights and justice. Mandela was finally released in 1990, and his unwavering commitment to peace and reconciliation played a crucial role in the eventual dismantling of apartheid and his election as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Number 2. Fyodor Dostoevsky. One of Russia's greatest literary figures, Fyodor Dostoevsky endured a harrowing imprisonment that profoundly influenced his life and work. In 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested for his involvement with the Petrashevsky Circle, a group of intellectuals discussing Western philosophy and criticizing the Tsarist regime. Initially sentenced to death by firing squad, Dostoevsky experienced a shocking twist of fate. Just moments before his execution, a last-minute reprieve from Tsar Nicholas I commuted his sentence to hard labor in Siberia, followed by compulsory military service. Dostoevsky spent 4 years in a labor camp in Omsk, Siberia, under appalling conditions. Confined in a wooden barracks with other convicts, he faced brutal treatment, inadequate food, and relentless cold. The labor was grueling, and he was forbidden to read anything but a Bible, which he studied intensely. The psychological impact of his near execution and the years of hardship profoundly shaped his worldview, deepening his understanding of human suffering, redemption, and the complexities of the human soul. This period of imprisonment marked a turning point in Dostoevsky's life and writing. After his release, he reflected on these experiences in his semi-autobiographical novel, The House of the Dead, which offers a vivid depiction of prison life and the moral struggles of the inmates. Dostoevsky's imprisonment not only shaped his literary legacy, but also solidified his belief in the power of suffering to bring about personal and spiritual transformation. Number 3. Billy Hayes. Billy Hayes is best known for his harrowing experience as a young American imprisoned in Turkey for drug smuggling, which he later chronicled in his memoir, Midnight Express. In 1970, Hayes was arrested at Istanbul's airport with 2 kilograms of hashish strapped to his body. Initially sentenced to 4 years and 2 months, his sentence was unexpectedly extended to 30 years when Turkish authorities sought to make an example of him amidst a crackdown on drug offenses. Hayes endured brutal conditions in the Sarmalkila prison, where overcrowding, violence, and poor sanitation were rampant. The psychological toll was immense, as Hayes faced isolation, corruption, and the constant threat of physical abuse. The harsh environment and the uncertainty of his future led Hayes to attempt several escapes, ultimately succeeding in 1975 after nearly 5 years of imprisonment. His story gained international attention, especially after being adapted into a film in 1978, which portrayed the ordeal vividly. Though the film dramatized aspects of his experience, Hayes's real-life struggles highlighted the severe consequences of drug offenses in foreign countries and the brutal conditions within the Turkish prison system. Number 4. Reuben "Hurricane" Carter. Reuben "Hurricane" Carter was a professional boxer whose life took a dramatic turn when he was wrongfully convicted of triple murder in 1967. At the height of his boxing career, Carter was accused of a crime he consistently maintained he did not commit. Despite a lack of physical evidence and dubious witness testimonies, he was sentenced to life in prison, spending nearly 20 years behind bars. Carter's imprisonment was marked by a relentless fight for justice. While incarcerated, he wrote his autobiography, The 16th Round, which garnered widespread attention and support, including from celebrities and activists who believed in his innocence. His case became a symbol of racial injustice and the flaws in the American legal system. In 1985, after nearly 2 decades of legal battles and public advocacy, Carter's conviction was finally overturned by a federal judge who cited that his prosecution was based on racism rather than reason. Carter's release marked the end of a long struggle for justice, but his years in prison left an indelible impact, fueling his lifelong advocacy for the wrongfully convicted and his ongoing fight against racial injustice in the legal system. Number 5. Henri Charrière. Henri Charrière, better known by his nickname Papillon, was a Frenchman who became famous for his incredible tale of survival and escape from the brutal French penal colonies in South America. Convicted in 1931 for a murder he claimed he did not commit, Charrière was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to the notorious Devil's Island, part of the French Guiana penal colony, known for its harsh conditions and inescapable nature. Charrière endured extreme hardships, including forced labor, malnutrition, and the oppressive tropical climate. Despite the brutal conditions, he became determined to escape. Over the years, he made multiple daring escape attempts, each time facing severe punishment when caught, including years in solitary confinement. His persistence paid off when he finally managed to escape in 1941, reaching freedom after an arduous journey across treacherous seas and jungles. Charrière's story was immortalized in his autobiographical novel, Papillon, published in 1969. Which became a bestseller and was later adapted into a popular film. Number 6. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian and pastor who became a key figure in the resistance against Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. His strong opposition to Nazi policies, especially their treatment of Jews, led him to join a plot to assassinate Hitler. In 1943, Bonhoeffer was arrested by the Gestapo for his involvement in the resistance and for his outspoken criticism of the regime. Bonhoeffer spent 2 years in various prisons and concentration camps, including Tegel Prison and the notorious Buchenwald and Flossenburg camps. During his imprisonment, he continued to write and reflect deeply on his faith. Despite the brutal conditions and the constant threat of execution, Bonhoeffer remained steadfast in his beliefs and unwavering in his commitment to justice. In April 1945, just weeks before the end of World War II, Bonhoeffer was executed by hanging on Hitler's orders. His legacy as a martyr and a symbol of moral courage endures, inspiring countless people around the world to stand up against oppression and injustice, even at great personal cost. Number 7. John Bunyan. John Bunyan, an English writer and preacher, is best known for his classic work, The Pilgrim's Progress. In the mid-17th century, Bunyan was arrested for preaching without a license, which was illegal under the religious laws of the time. As a nonconformist preacher, Bunyan refused to align with the Church of England, leading to his imprisonment in 1660. Bunyan was sentenced to 12 years in Bedford jail, where he faced harsh conditions, including isolation from his family. Despite these hardships, Bunyan remained resolute in his faith and continued to preach and write while incarcerated. It was during this time that he began working on the Pilgrim's Progress, an allegory of the Christian journey from sin to salvation. His imprisonment only deepened his spiritual insights, which he poured into his writing. Bunyan's work, written under such difficult circumstances, became one of the most influential books in English literature, profoundly impacting Christian thought and literature. Number 8. Alexander Pechersky. Alexander Pechersky was a Soviet Jewish soldier and a key figure in one of the most significant uprisings during the Holocaust. In 1941, he was captured by the Nazis during World War II and sent to the Sobibor extermination camp in Poland. The camp was notorious for its brutal conditions, where tens of thousands of Jews were systematically murdered. Despite the horrific circumstances, Pechersky quickly organized a resistance among the prisoners. In October 1943, he led a daring and well-coordinated revolt, where prisoners overpowered the guards, killed several SS officers, and managed to break through the camp's barbed wire fences. About 300 prisoners escaped, though many were recaptured or killed in the process. Pechersky himself managed to survive, hiding in the forests and eventually joining Soviet partisans to continue fighting against the Nazis. Pechersky's leadership and bravery in Sobibor became a symbol of resistance against unimaginable evil. His role in the uprising, one of the few successful revolts in a Nazi extermination camp, is remembered as a testament to the resilience and courage of those who resisted the Holocaust's horrors. After the war, Pechersky lived in the Soviet Union, where his story was initially downplayed due to political reasons, but he later received recognition for his heroic actions. Number 9. Kim Dae-jung. Kim Dae-jung, a prominent South Korean politician and democracy activist, endured multiple imprisonments and near executions in his lifelong struggle for democracy and human rights. In the 1970s, during the authoritarian regime of President Park Chung-hee, Kim was a vocal critic advocating for democratic reforms. His opposition led to his arrest in 1971 after a failed presidential bid and subsequent abduction by the Korean Central Intelligence Agency in 1973. He narrowly escaped assassination due to international pressure. In 1980, following another military coup, Kim was arrested again and sentenced to death for his role in pro-democracy protests. His imprisonment was marked by harsh conditions, including isolation and threats of execution. However, international outcry, particularly from the United States, led to his sentence being commuted to life imprisonment and later reduced to house arrest. Despite these ordeals, Kim Dae-jung's resolve never wavered. He continued to fight for democracy, eventually becoming South Korea's president in 1998. His leadership in promoting peace and reconciliation with North Korea earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000, cementing his legacy as a champion of democracy and human rights. Number 10. Klaus von Stauffenberg. Klaus von Stauffenberg was a German army officer and key figure in the July 20, 1944, plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. A dedicated patriot, Stauffenberg initially supported Hitler but became increasingly disillusioned as he witnessed the atrocities committed by the regime, particularly against Jews and other minorities. This moral awakening led him to join the German resistance. On July 20, 1944, Stauffenberg placed a bomb in a conference room at Hitler's headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair. Although the bomb detonated, Hitler survived, and the coup attempt quickly unraveled. Stauffenberg and his fellow conspirators were arrested by the Gestapo later that evening. Stauffenberg was subjected to a swift, brutal punishment. He was brought before a summary court-martial and sentenced to death without a formal trial. Number 11. Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was an influential Italian Marxist philosopher, writer, and politician, known for his profound contributions to political theory and his concept of cultural hegemony. Gramsci was a founding member of the Italian Communist Party and a vocal critic of Mussolini's fascist regime. His political activities and writings made him a target for the authorities, and in 1926 he was arrested by the fascist government. Gramsci was sentenced to 20 years in prison, where he endured extremely harsh conditions that severely impacted his health. Despite suffering from various illnesses and being denied proper medical care, Gramsci used his imprisonment to produce some of his most important works. These writings covered a wide range of topics, including culture, politics, philosophy, and history, and have since become foundational texts in Marxist theory. Number 12. Miguel de Cervantes. Miguel de Cervantes, the renowned Spanish author, best known for his masterpiece Don Quixote, experienced significant hardship during his life, including a period of imprisonment that deeply influenced his writing. In 1575, while returning to Spain from military service in Italy, Cervantes was captured by Barbary pirates and taken to Algiers. He spent 5 years in captivity, enduring harsh conditions and several failed escape attempts before finally being ransomed and released in 1580. After returning to Spain, Cervantes faced continued financial difficulties, leading to another brief imprisonment in 1597, this time in Seville, due to discrepancies in his accounts while working as a tax collector. It is believed that Cervantes began drafting Don Quixote during this period, drawing upon his experiences of hardship and the vivid characters he encountered in prison. His imprisonment, while a difficult chapter in his life, ultimately fueled his creative genius, contributing to the development of one of the most influential novels in Western literature. Number 13. Thomas More. Thomas More, an English statesman, lawyer, was a prominent figure in the early 16th century, known for his devout Catholic faith and his principled stand against King Henry VIII. More served as Lord Chancellor of England, but his steadfast refusal to endorse Henry VIII's separation from the Catholic Church and the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn led to his downfall. In 1534, More was imprisoned in the Tower of London after refusing to take the oath of supremacy, which declared Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England. More's imprisonment was marked by harsh conditions, including isolation from his family and limited access to the outside world. Despite these hardships, he remained resolute in his beliefs, spending his time in the Tower in prayer and writing. In 1535, after more than a year of imprisonment, More was tried for treason and found guilty. He was sentenced to death and executed by beheading on July 6, 1535. Number 14. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, an iconic figure in American history, is best known for her courageous efforts as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, leading countless enslaved people to freedom. Born into slavery around 1822 in Maryland, Tubman escaped to the North in 1849. However, her work was far from over. She returned to the South multiple times, risking her life to guide others to freedom. While Tubman was never formally imprisoned in a traditional sense, she lived under the constant threat of capture, which would have likely resulted in severe punishment, imprisonment, or death. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made her missions even more dangerous, as it allowed for the capture of escaped slaves in free states and increased the bounties on her head. Number 15. Omar Mukhtar. Omar Mukhtar, often called the Lion of the Desert, was a prominent leader of the resistance against Italian colonization in Libya during the early 20th century. Born in 1862, Mukhtar became the leader of the resistance movement, which fought a guerrilla war against Italian forces for over 2 decades, beginning in the 1920s. In 1931, after years of relentless struggle, Mukhtar was eventually captured by the Italian forces during a skirmish. Following his capture, he was subjected to a swift and highly publicized trial by the Italian colonial authorities, who sought to make an example of him to quell the resistance. Despite the opportunity to renounce his actions and potentially save his life, Mukhtar remained defiant, refusing to betray his principles and his people. On September 16, 1931, Omar Mukhtar was executed by hanging in the presence of thousands of Libyans forced to witness the event. Number 16. Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky, a key figure in the Russian Revolution and a prominent Marxist theorist, played a significant role in shaping the Soviet Union's early years. However, after Vladimir Lenin's death in 1924, Trotsky found himself in a power struggle with Joseph Stalin, which he ultimately lost. Stalin, viewing Trotsky as a threat, began systematically removing him from power, eventually exiling him from the Soviet Union in 1929. Trotsky spent the following years in various countries, continuing his revolutionary activities and criticism of Stalin's regime. His most notable imprisonment occurred in 1937 in Mexico, where he had sought asylum. Although not imprisoned in a traditional sense, Trotsky lived under constant threat of assassination by Stalin's agents. His home in Mexico City was heavily guarded, and he was effectively a prisoner within his own home, isolated from much of the outside world. In 1940, Stalin's long reach finally caught up with Trotsky. An assassin sent by Stalin infiltrated his inner circle and attacked Trotsky with an ice axe, leading to his death a day later. Number 17. Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, the last Queen of France before the French Revolution, faced a dramatic fall from grace that culminated in her imprisonment and execution. Born an Austrian archduchess, she married Louis XVI and became Queen of France in 1774. However, her extravagant lifestyle and perceived indifference to the suffering of the French people made her a symbol of the monarchy's excesses. As the French Revolution gained momentum, the royal family was arrested in 1792 and eventually imprisoned in the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris. Marie Antoinette endured harsh conditions in confinement, separated from her children, and subjected to intense scrutiny and public scorn. Her situation worsened after the execution of Louis XVI in January 1793, leaving her alone and vulnerable. In October 1793, Marie Antoinette was transferred to the conciergerie, known as the waiting room to the guillotine. After a brief and heavily biased trial, she was convicted of treason and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed by guillotine, marking the end of the monarchy she once represented. Number 18. Victor Jara. Victor Jara, a Chilean folk singer, poet, and political activist, became a symbol of resistance during the brutal military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet in 1973. Jara was a committed supporter of President Salvador Allende and used his art to advocate for social justice and workers' rights. Following the coup, Jara was arrested and taken to Santiago's Estadio Chile, which had been turned into a detention and torture center. In the stadium, Jara was brutally tortured by Pinochet's forces. His hands were shattered, and he was mocked for being a musician, yet he continued to sing defiantly, inspiring fellow prisoners. After days of severe abuse, Jara was executed by gunfire, his body riddled with bullets and discarded outside the stadium. Number 19. Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of India's non-violent independence movement, was imprisoned several times by British authorities as he fought for India's freedom from colonial rule. His most significant imprisonment occurred during the Salt March in 1930 and the Quit India movement in 1942. In 1930, Gandhi led the Salt March, a 240-mile protest against the British salt tax, which resulted in his arrest. He was imprisoned for almost a year, during which time his movement gained international attention. In 1942, Gandhi launched the Quit India movement, calling for an end to British rule. This led to his arrest, along with other leaders of the Indian National Congress. He was detained for nearly 2 years under harsh conditions in the Aga Khan Palace. Despite his imprisonment, Gandhi's commitment to non-violence and civil disobedience inspired millions and eventually led to India's independence in 1947. His imprisonments became powerful symbols of resistance against colonial oppression. Number 20. Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde, the celebrated Irish playwright and author, faced a tragic downfall when he was imprisoned in 1895 for gross indecency due to his homosexual relationships, which were criminalized in Victorian England. Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor, first in Pentonville and then in Reading Jail. The harsh conditions of the prison, including forced labor, poor diet, and isolation, severely impacted Wilde's health and spirit. Wilde's imprisonment not only broke his health, but also his career and social standing. After his release in 1897, he lived in exile in France until his death in 1900. That's all we've got. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on these individuals who endured such harsh imprisonment. Make sure to like the video and hit the subscribe button. See you in the next one.